Okay, now our gospel passage comes from Luke 17, verses 11 through 19, which just follows right up after last week's gospel. As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." As they were going, they were cleansed, and one of them, realizing he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice, and fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God?" Then he said to him, "Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you." Okay, this is a really, really neat story here. So obviously there's a connection between the first reading and the gospel with the leprosy of all that's taking place. But just to point out, okay, so if we remember, I think it's back in chapter 9, it says that Jesus resolutely turned. He turned his face to Jerusalem. I think it's in chapter 9 that he does this, that he makes his direction there. Maybe it's 12. Anyway, at some point he turns his face to Jerusalem, and so he's just on his way. And we know that Jerusalem, in hindsight, of course, we know that Jerusalem is the place of the cross. But nonetheless, he actually has to journey there. He actually has to move in that direction. And it says that he went through Galilee and Samaria. So Galilee is in the northern part of Israel, of the Holy Land. And to get to Jerusalem, you have to travel through Samaria. What is Samaria? So Samaria is that part of the Holy Land where, okay, so let's back up just a minute. So if you remember, I talk about this all the time, but there's this civil war that takes place where the northern tribes, the 10 of the northern tribes, they break off from the 2 southern tribes, and they kind of form their own nation, which they still go by the nation of Israel, but there's other names of Ephraim and of Joseph. There's different names for that. Mostly it's Israel. The 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, they go by the kingdom of Judah. And in Judah is where Jerusalem is, which is where the temple is. So that's like an incredibly important thing, that when these 10 break off, they separate themselves from the temple. And so they set up a false temple for worship to still to the Lord, but nonetheless, it's not the temple that's in Jerusalem. Okay, so anyway, so then there's the Assyrian exile. So the people from Assyria come in, they conquer the northern tribes, and they lead some of them off into exile, but some of them, they remain there, and the Assyrians come in and they begin to inhabit that land. Whereas with the Babylonian exile coming in and conquering the southern tribes, they lead them off into exile entirely. So anyway, so what's important about the Assyrians coming in and inhabiting the Holy Land, the land of Israel, with the Israelites, is that they start to intermingle with each other. They start to intermarry with each other, which is a big no, basically. You know, like God has chosen his people and he wants them, because marrying people of other nations means that you're going to let your heart go astray. You can think of Solomon and how he had, you know, all of those wives and concubines, and marrying these women of other countries, his heart turned to the false gods of these other countries. And so Solomon is like an image of what happens to the entire people of Israel when they start to intermarry with the Assyrians. And I wouldn't say that all of them intermarried, but when the nation gives itself over to that and starts to grant permissions, that's a big problem. And so the group of people that have intermarried, the Assyrians and the Israelites marrying together, those people are called the Samaritans. And so traveling through the land of Samaria Jesus is traveling through this land of people who basically sold out on their own nation and on their God. So that's like a big thing. And so the Judahites, the people from the south, they avoided the Samaritans as much as they possibly could. They saw them as like dirty, filthy people, traitors, who committed like just the worst act of betrayal for God's own people. So that's who they are. Okay, so when Jesus is traveling through there, we know that there are different times when he has interactions. You know, you can think of the woman at the well, the woman of Samaria. He had an interaction with her. But here's what's happening. Okay, so that's the background. So he's entering a village. 10 lepers meet him. So remember, the lepers are these people who, well, actually, maybe we haven't fully talked about this. But in the book of Leviticus, when God is laying out the laws of worship. He includes the possibility that people could contract this disease called leprosy. We know that Naaman had this leprosy, but whether it was the same exact leprosy that we're talking about here as what Naaman had, it's not entirely clear. But nonetheless, people could contract this disease called leprosy, which was understood to be contagious. And what's more, it was a sign of death. So the worship of God is our connection to God, who is life. That you think of specifically in the temple. To go into the temple is to go into the life of God. And there's no place for death in the life of God. So when people contracted leprosy, there was a law in the book of Leviticus, or a set of laws about them, about how they could go about being inspected to see whether they actually had leprosy, to see whether they were cleansed of their leprosy. You could read about this specifically in like Leviticus chapters 13 and 14. So anyway, so when a person contracted leprosy, they were not considered fit for the worship of God, who is life, because they had this sign of death. And it wasn't just leprosy. There were other instances, but here we're talking about lepers. And so they were considered ritually unclean. It's not that they were bad people necessarily. It's just that ritually speaking, they were not fit for the worship of God. And so they had to, as part of the law, they had to live at a distance from everyone else. When they contracted leprosy, they had to go and inhabit places apart. They had to not only inhabit places apart, but they had to declare themselves unclean. They were to cover their upper lip and just simply shout out, "Unclean, unclean." That was the requirement. So when Jesus interacts with these, or when these 10 lepers meet him, they're standing a distance from him and they're raising their voices, except they aren't, at least not recorded here, they aren't calling out unclean, unclean. They're calling out, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us," as though they understand in Jesus that he can do something for them that no one else can do. You know, you think of the response of the king of Israel when Naaman comes and he's like, who can cure leprosy but God alone? That's the sense it appears that these lepers have of Jesus, that he can do something that only God can do. And so they're calling out, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us," which is, what a beautiful image of people understanding, like, there's something in Jesus. There's someone in Jesus that I can't find anywhere else, And so it's like I call out to him in my most desperate moment, because I know that no one else can take care of me like he can. And so I'm going to call out to him, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And so when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priest," which is, again, like a strange thing, because he easily could have just said, I cleanse you of your leprosy, and they would have been cleansed. But again, according to the law, in order for them to be considered ritually pure, they had to be investigated by the priests of the temple and to be declared to be fit for worship. So it's interesting that Jesus, he comes to establish this new covenant. He comes to fulfill the law and the prophets. And at the same time, he's still concerned about the law. He still has this understanding of, like, well, the law is important. Which, again, I think as Christians, maybe we can be dismissive of the Old Testament laws. And Jesus wasn't dismissive of them. Now, it's true that because of the new covenant, we're not required to follow all of those laws. And we have the new law that he gives to us. But nonetheless, he's not declaring the old law to be unimportant or insignificant. And especially at this time, when he hadn't yet established the new covenant, which is the Eucharist. He hadn't yet established that. So he's still concerned about the law, and he's concerned about these people being able to worship the Father in spirit and in truth, in righteousness, according to the law. That's just an interesting thing worth pointing out. So anyway, so as they were going, they were cleansed. So that's an interesting, in their obedience to Jesus, this is where he brings about their cleansing. And one of them, realizing he'd been healed, returned glorifying God in a loud voice, and he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. That word, "and thanked him," the word is Eucharisteo. So he Eucharisted to Jesus, thanksgiving. He gave thanksgiving to him. And what's interesting is he's glorifying God, of course, but he falls at the feet of Jesus. He prostrates himself before Jesus. And Jesus doesn't correct him. Like there's a scene in the Acts of the Apostles, I don't remember where it is. There's a scene in the Acts of the Apostles where people encounter the divine power working through Peter, and so they want to fall down and worship him. Peter and Paul. And their response is like, "No, we're not God. We're humans, just like you are." Jesus doesn't give that response. It's like he allows this cleansed leper to fall at his feet and to prostrate himself, as though worshiping him as he's glorifying God. And And what it says here, so then when it says he was a Samaritan, for any Jewish person reading that, it would have been like, oh, I didn't realize this. And so then Jesus says, okay, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? So just as Naaman was a foreigner who had been cleansed by the power of God because he cooperated with the servant of God, so too this foreigner, Samaritan, and to be sure the other lepers were cleansed as well, but this Samaritan is the one who's highlighted because he's a foreigner and he cooperated with the grace of God and he returned to give thanks. If you remember Naaman, when he was cleansed, he returned to Elisha to give thanks and offer a gift of thanksgiving. This leper, this cleansed leper now, this Samaritan, he returns to give a gift of thanksgiving. What is that gift? But his worship, his reverence, and his honor that he gives to Jesus as he glorifies God. So it's an interesting thing. That word foreigner is allogenes, which literally means someone from another race. So again, remember, the chosen people were the Jewish people, the Israelites, who were chosen by God. And many of them had this understanding of like, this is just for us and not for everyone. And here Jesus is revealing, he's beginning to reveal that the message of salvation, the message of the gospel is not just for this one race of people, but it is for anyone who has faith in the Lord, because he says, stand up and go, your faith has saved you. So there's this response that we give to the grace of God, this response of gratitude and of faithfulness, this gratitude and faithfulness of returning and giving thanks to God and offering him the gift. And what is that gift? The gift of our worship, and faithfulness to then responding in obedience to the initiative of Jesus, which is ultimately the initiative of the Father. So anyway, really, really nice connection that we have here of the Lord coming to cleanse us and bring about our purification, so that what? So that we can worship. So the whole purpose of the cleansing is so that we can worship. And that's, again, just like a really important point. A lot of people say, no, I've been cleansed, and then they're not worshiping. And it's like, no, the purpose of you being cleansed is for your worship. And that comes about, of course, we know by way of our baptism, so that there's this connection here of Jesus cleansing us with the connection of Naaman, who was cleansed by way of his baptism into the Jordan. Jesus cleanses us now by way of our baptism so that we can then worship the Father in spirit and in truth, which is what our response is meant to be. Beautiful. So good. Okay, we still have a really great reading from Timothy coming up, St. Paul's letter to Timothy. So I will see you for our last session coming up soon. Peace.